Go ahead and get your
They're officially recording.
Okay. This open meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, and the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the Governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. I hereby call to order the December 2nd meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee at 6:30 p.m. I'm Narissa Wallen, Chair of the Triton Regional School Committee, and I would like to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Erin?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Paul Goldner?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Maureen Heffernan?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Caitlin Hunter?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Paul Lees?
I am here. I can hear you.
Thank you, Paul. Linda Litkowski?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Paul Mayette?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. And Tina Tsortzis?
I'm here and I can hear you.
And I'm going to remember her this time, Kaylee Abbott Bishop, since she was in.
She's
I checked
on
her
mute.
though. Oh, that's right. I was going to say I checked her this time, and
I'm here and I can hear you.
thank you, Kaylee.
Thank you.
All right, staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Triton Superintendent Brian Forget.
Here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Assistant Superintendent Kim Croto.
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. School Business Administrator Kyle Warren.
I'm here and I can hear you.
And Special Education Director Dave McGee.
I'm here and I can hear you.
All right, thank you all. For this meeting, the Triton School Committee is convening remotely via Zoom using the information posted on the district's website identifying how the public may join. If you are personally attending by video conference using your device's camera, please be aware that others may be able to see you. Committee members and administrators, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the district's website with the agenda posting unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. Each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that anything you broadcast will be captured by the recording. All right. I think we still have a couple people coming in here. So I can't believe I just had to say this is the December 2nd meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee because it does not feel like it's December. I can say that. This was a meeting that wasn't on our original calendar, so I thank all the committee members for making the time for this on relatively short notice. You know, you're notified on Monday that we wanted to hold this meeting after the decision was made to move the middle school and high school over to remote learning. So this is a direct result of that. We will have our regular business meeting, which was scheduled for December 9th on the 9th. That's the intent right now. And we'll handle all the usual items at that point, like the minutes approval and our regular business items. So that leaves us tonight with a discussion on COVID cases in the schools and the dashboard data and a discussion on the data review group. We are going to head straight into public comment, oral communications from the public. So before I get there, I just do want to finish my comments and ask people to, again, mind their P's and Q's when they are watching this meeting. There's been behavior in the past on the part of the public that I hope we won't see again. I also want to remind people, both committee members and the public, that that we are dealing with some patient privacy issues here. So I would ask people not to, just be careful what you say with that in mind. That said, oral communications from the public. The next item on the agenda is public comment. Members of the public, the meeting host muted you as you entered the meeting. If you would like to address the committee, please indicate now that you would like to do so, either by raising your hand on your video call, using the raise hand option on the participant screen. And if you're new to Zoom, you can get to the participant screen by mousing over in most installations, mousing over the bottom of the screen. It will give you an option that says participants. And once you have that screen up, you should see the raise hand option there. The meeting host will unmute you so that you can address the committee. Please refer to the public comment policy language on the agenda when making your comments, and remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. When you have finished speaking, the meeting host will mute you again. And I'll read what's on the agenda. I just do want to note too, asking people to identify themselves. I know sometimes we have first and last names in the Zoom information that you entered when you came in, but we don't always have that. So it's really helpful if you can give your first and last name as you're beginning to speak. On the agenda, it says members of the public may address the committee for up to 3 minutes longer with the permission of the chairperson. The committee will not engage in a discussion on topics raised during public comment, but may choose to add the topic to a future agenda. This agenda segment will be limited to 15 minutes unless extended at the discretion of the chairperson. As we have in recent past minutes, I will give it up to 30 minutes tonight if we have enough members of the public to actually fill that time. So that said, I'm opening it up for public comment. All right, I see no, oh, Martha Tatro. Hang on and I'll unmute you. There you go.
Hey, I just want to, I really just want to say thank you. These last couple of weeks have been awful. I'm just going to be blunt. I'm upset with people in the community that have just completely disregarded all the guidance, because at the end of the day, the school committee and Brian and your staff really listened to what those of us that wanted our kids in school and what we wanted. And I really just feel like I need to make sure that I say thank you, because it's disappointing. And I get why some people made the decisions they made. I don't know. I've been very honest. We gave up a lot to not go to my in-laws. It's my mother-in-law's was her birthday, her first Thanksgiving without my father-in-law. We chose to stay home because I wanted my son to be able to be in school. And so to have other people in this community who have been battling you to get their kid to be able to stay in school and have some people make some of those choices, and now we're in the situation we're in, is disheartening. I do appreciate truly, Brian, that you made the decision to just leave it to the middle school and the high school, because that appears where a lot of, that change was. I do know in other schools, based on looking at the dashboard, that there are some additional issues, but based on what I know, it's being dealt with by classrooms. And I think that's amazing. And I want to continue to support that. So I guess for me, it was just really important to be able to say thank you, and to know that as hard as that decision was, that there are people like myself wholeheartedly that support you 100%. This has not been easy for any of you. And it's been rough. It's not what you were elected for, but you continue to show up. And some of these battles have been difficult. I was also upset a couple weeks ago when I heard about the incident on Zoom. You don't deserve that. You are giving and giving and giving. And for that, I just need to make sure I say thank you.
Thank you. Wendy's iPhone is next.
Hi.
Hey, Wendy, we can hear you.
Hi, my name's Wendy Richardson. I have a child at Salisbury Elementary. Thank you all. You're doing a great job. I want to add that we too gave up a Thanksgiving, had just our household members here at home. It does stink that the numbers are going up and some people aren't doing the right thing. I'm liking what I see as far as calls being made regarding classrooms, grades in the middle school, high school. In their case, it was the whole school. I'm hoping that we can continue to keep the kids hybrid, and as long as the staff is available, we're able to make the shifts via, the classrooms, the grade or whatnot. That's it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. All right, anyone else? Jim Moran. Jim, it should be asking you to unmute. There you go.
Yes, this is Jim Moran in Byfield. I'm asking the school committee to implement a program for the 3 elementary schools in the Triton Regional School District to be open for in-school learning 4 days per week. Other elementary schools in the area, in accordance with the DESE guidelines, have been doing this successfully for the past 10 weeks. I've been advocating for this program since October. Thank you, and thank you for all the hard work the school committee's been doing over the months.
All right, thank you. Anyone else who wants to speak during public comments? All right, I'm just scrolling through to see if I see any other videos. All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the agenda. The next item is COVID cases in schools and the dashboard data discussion. So I'm going to let the superintendent give us a quick summary on what's transpired in the last week and a half since we met.
Absolutely. So as several have noted, the most prominent decision obviously was the decision to shift the middle and high school to fully remote. As we had talked about prior to the holiday, my angle has been that if we keep the district in hybrid, we make decisions based on school-specific data. The other kind of barometer that I look at, and obviously our nurses, and I see Terry's on the call, and I think I've seen a couple other names pop up with our school nurses who have been doing, to say they've been doing yeoman's work is way underestimating the work that they've been doing. But it's the in-school spread, right? It's that community spread within the schools or in-school spread that is certainly where we start to say, okay, this is where we have to take action. So up until this point, the cases have been, they've been growing, right? You can see on the dashboard, there's been a total of 16 cases to date. Obviously, one of them was way back in September before we were even in hybrid, and then starting on November 13th. We've had 15 cases since then, a mixture of students and staff, but there was a significant uptick. Basically, the phone rang, I think it was 8 o'clock the day after Thanksgiving, and it's been ever since. So the cases specifically at the middle and the high school, it was a matter of, and I should say that the cases we've been dealing with, the nurses and the principals do the lion's share of the in-school tracing in conjunction with Kristen Jolivet, who is, as you know, is hired by the 3 towns health departments to do the tracing for schools within the community. So they have been, as I said, working 24/7. But in doing those tracings, it's largely shown, right? There's no perfect definitive, we know for a fact, but it's largely shown that there was no in-school spread. We had 2 cases actually on I think it was one on Saturday and then one again on Monday, where the case, and this was a combination of the timing where parents notified us, and then also another concern, and I know we talk about this all the time, and I was talking with Kristen Jolivet about this earlier, the response times and the turnaround times for testing, which are clearly going in the wrong direction. When we're getting responses from tests 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days after the tests are taken or longer, most of the time, those individuals have removed themselves if they were symptomatic or otherwise. And so there isn't significant exposure. But in 2 of the cases, one at the middle and one at the high, it was very clear that there was, I don't know how to say this, I don't keep my HIPAA laws intact, this is not my training. There was no clear path where we could say confidently, we feel pretty good that no in-school transmission occurred as a result of this. So that was the reason for the decision at the middle and the high school, that we felt like there was all the close contacts, certainly all of the definitive close contacts were contacted. Certainly the nurses reached out directly. That's not just a letter, but make phone calls for all those close contacts. And then the shift to fully remote, including all high priority students, was because of the fact that you then can't find the edges, right? You can't find the periphery of where that might have landed. And so as far as exposure. So that is the path we've been taking. In my mind, this is a shift for 2 weeks to fully remote, and then shifting back into hybrid. And so that's where we land as of today. And you can see actually the dashboard was updated even as recently as today with a new case at Newbury Elementary School. And so I believe it was coming up on, actually, yeah, it's been 2 weeks. So 2 weeks ago, we had a situation at Pine Grove where the first grade shifted to entirely remote. The number of close contacts was significantly less than the entire first grade, but because of staffing implications, we had to shift the entire first grade to remote because so many of the staff were implicated and had to quarantine. The same is what happened today at Newbury. So that doesn't mean that the whole fifth grade is quarantining. That means that because of staff members who were deemed to be close contacts, we then don't have the staff that are able to be in school. And so we have to shift the entire grade level to learning from home. So the same thinking and rationale that was the deciding or the driving force behind a decision to shift the middle school and high school to fully remote is the same thinking. That was the decision behind that call I made it, whatever, week and a half, 2 weeks ago. And then again today at Newbury Elementary. So that's when we met on, I think that was Monday. So whatever the group is that Kim and I, along with Narissa and Maureen, just to look at the dashboard. I actually got the call, another call while we were meeting. And so that was when I just, said, this is it, this is what we're going to do. But in looking at that dashboard and that data, and then with that fact and me saying, okay, we're going to make the shift. I think everyone agreed that yes, it made sense to convene the committee, have an update, have a discussion, see where people are at. And I know this is kind of the next step, but have some real clear parameters on what will trigger a need to call another meeting. So, so that's kind of the update of what brings us here this evening. So I guess to say, are there questions? I'm assuming there are questions that I probably didn't answer, and that might be the easiest approach.
Superintendent, and then I want to just quickly go through kind of the dashboard data that is outside of what the superintendent just addressed. I think that's important as well. Police.
So Brian, I just have a question. Is it safe to say that we're gonna do away with the categorization that a case started or was transmitted in school, because the science isn't really there to pinpoint that, is it?
To be able to say if a case started in the school?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to kind of avoid that in the future, aren't we?
I don't know that I would say that. I mean, generally through tracing, there is a sense of where the case, that's part of the tracing protocol, is to figure out where that case began. Is it a perfect science? And I don't want to speak for the nurses or anyone else who's involved in that. Is it a perfect science? I don't believe it is a perfect science. But I think there is some, when there's clear evidence, and the majority of these cases, there was concern about in-school spread for both the Pine Grove and the Newbury case today, and that was staff to staff. Do we know it was in school? Of course, we don't know for a fact, but given the proximity of the individuals and timing and such, but again, being able to contain that now with having shifted the grade level, and the same thing that happened with the first grade at Pine Grove, that was a result of that being able to fairly clearly ascertain where the origins of it were, or it was. I don't know if that answers the question or creates another question.
I don't have another question.
Okay.
You don't? Okay.
Not right now.
Can save them for later. All right. Any other questions from the committee? I guess, Brian, I would ask you as follow-up to that to define in-school spread, or yeah.
Yeah, actually, probably two definitions I should clarify and that have been the topic of discussion. So the first, so in-school spread would be when we are able to, with relative certainty, right, that the nurses through conversations, and again, these are confidential conversations where there's a fine art of trying to have a conversation with people without identifying the person you're asking about. So ultimately, there are certainly times when it's a need to know basis and that confidentiality is broken. But in-school spread would be where we have confidence that that virus was spread within the school, that there's a logical connection between two cases that would suggest, I don't know if that's the right term, the right medical term, but that would suggest that that virus was actually spread within the school. Again, I don't believe there's ever a perfect science there, but there's certainly fact patterns that would suggest that that's when that is the case. The other definition, I think it's important. I know Maureen, you had asked this question about close contact. So it seems like the CDC is perpetually redefining quarantining protocols and time periods. There was another adjustment today. We have nothing official that I've seen it through DPH or anything, but the 14-day is the standard quarantining. There is now an adjustment to that where if someone is tested on day 8 or later and is symptom-free and all that, that we could bring in people quicker. That becomes pretty problematic when you're doing that in large numbers. And right now we know the turnaround time for testing is pretty problematic. So, the concept of close contact is one that I know we have a slightly different definition for our elementary schools. So again, close contact is being within 6 feet, of someone, the infected individual, for 15 or more cumulative minutes in a 24-hour period. So at one point it was 15 minutes, and you could do that multiple times a day and not be a close contact. That was redefined or adjusted so that it's a cumulative 15 minutes. If you spend a cumulative 15 minutes with someone who was a positive for COVID, and you do that within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes, you're considered a close contact. So that is the standard we use as a general rule in the district. At the elementary, we've taken a little more cautious approach, and obviously, if you take it differs depending on grade level and on the day, but for all intent and purposes, a self-contained classroom at the elementary school, say 3rd grade at an elementary school, largely spends 6.5 hours, certainly with the same group and largely with the same educators. So originally DESE's recommendation was that we consider an elementary or any self-contained classroom, all of the individuals within that classroom who are spending 4, 5, 6 hours a day together, to consider them close contacts. They adjusted that late in the game. We kept that. My understanding in talking with many districts is at the elementary level, they did also keep that same standard. So again, so it's not if I brush by someone who was positive, or I stood with them and talked for 5 minutes, that does not make me a close contact. It's when it's an extended period of time. And certainly masks are good, masks help, but if you're within 6 feet of a positive individual, it doesn't matter whether you're masked or unmasked. If you're within 6 feet for greater than 15 minutes, you're considered a close contact. So that was another thing. I think there was some confusion about what exactly a close contact means. Again, to confirm, to use the 5th grade example again today, you can see on the paper, there are 24 total close contacts, which was a combination of staff and students. And that was largely one classroom and then some other students. So that's how we arrive at those numbers. But the entire 5th grade was not considered a close contact. So the messaging that went out from Beth Yando and Tara O'Keefe today to the Newbury community, similar to what has been going out routinely, unfortunately, from the principals and nurses in other buildings, there was a letter that went out to the whole school community. And then I think Tara today, the nurses call every individual who is a close contact directly and have that conversation. And then a secondary letter goes to those folks who are close contacts. And in the situation like we had today, there's a separate letter that goes to the 5th grade to say, and by the way, we're also having to shift. But again, to confirm, that doesn't mean that the whole 5th grade was a close contact by definition. So while they are learning remotely for the next 2 weeks, that doesn't mean they need to quarantine for the next 2 weeks.
Erin?
So Brian, is it safe to say that as we're going through and we're trying to determine the source of where someone may have caught COVID from, that we don't necessarily find out if where the source is. We're just hearing that it's not able to be pinpointed as a school contact. And I'm asking this because I'm hearing that there's a lot of difficulty with contact tracing, with people refusing to give information, refusing to go back and give the sources of who they've come in contact with, their willingness to actually be forthcoming with information, that 50% of the cases or more, they are not able to determine a source of it, as well as being able to get people to just be able to share information. So I know we're saying that they're not school sources, but is there a possibility that some of these really are school related contact that potentially is going undetected?
So to the last question, I believe the latest statistic I saw was that between 20 and 40% of positive individuals are asymptomatic. So there's no factual answer I can tell you to say that there aren't positive individuals walking around the halls, right? We know that the likelihood, given on ratios, that there are, and whether or not they're infected and spreading is a different discussion. But within the school, so I will use Newbury as the example latest today, the tracing that Tara did today really ends with the family, right? She doesn't have the authority. She then works with Kristen Jolivet, who is employed by the 3 towns and certainly works within the community to try and trace that back. Mm-hmm. So this goes back to the in-school transmission, where our hope is to certainly make sure that we can figure out exactly if it was transmitted within the schools. But once it goes beyond the family, we don't know, and I feel free to jump in, Tara, if you feel differently. We don't know in many cases where it came from outside of, right? That's not data that Tara doesn't have the authority, like a town health agent, town health official, if you will, to then actually quarantine someone and all of that, right? The quarantining we do is, if it's a requirement, it's through the authority of Kristen Jolivet working through the town health agents. We happen to have, 99.99% of the time, our families are incredibly cooperative, right? It's a very different experience than, I would say, I don't want to speak on behalf of Kristen Jolivet, but she has certainly expressed similar frustration to what you just said, that tracing is considerably challenging when within a single family you get multiple stories. And so, yes, tracing is very challenging.
Yeah, and that's exactly why the 14-day quarantine discussion came up, because they're trying to get people to be more forthcoming. So they figure if they lower the quarantine, that the quarantine time frame, that they might be able to get more people to speak. It's not necessarily that they think that the symptoms aren't coming out at the 14-day period still. It's the fact that they want more people to speak up.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I read too. Yep. Oh, you're muted, Narissa.
Sorry, I unmuted Paul Goldner so that he could speak.
I guess it's a similar question. The public health officials are following up with everybody in quarantine to make sure they're maintaining the quarantine. Is that correct?
That is my understanding, yes.
Do we know how much success they're having with that and those questions and those interviews?
I don't have a specific answer. I would say that Kristen has expressed frustration. So my summation there is it's not always going swimmingly.
Is that it, Paul? Okay. Any other questions? I just want to go back to the in-school spread, Brian, because I feel like I heard 2 different things from you. Are you counting in-school spread as only student to student?
No, we have not had any student to student. We've had what we believe to be 2 cases of in-school transmission, and they were both staff to staff.
Okay, I'd heard you say we haven't had any in-school transmission, and then I also heard you say that, which leads me to believe that when you say in-school transmission, you are counting that as student student to student or presumably staff to student, but not staff to staff is not being counted in there, or?
It is I would say any transmission within the school is in-school transmission. So if I said there hadn't been any in-school transmission, but yes, the two, and it's actually the first grade and the fifth grade, which are the two grades that ended up with the full grade level, basically isolating for 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the committee before we go on? All right, I just want to take you through some of the dashboard numbers. So as the superintendent mentioned, we had established the, we don't have an official name for it yet. We were trying to figure one out. The data review group, for lack of a better term, right now, that group, obviously the data last week was delayed from the state level because of Thanksgiving. So that group was kind of going back and forth via email over the weekend. We ended up actually adding Maureen back in, who had been, she'd been kind of part of the discussion about having another school committee member in that group before. The superintendent suggested that having me standing on my own in that group was not perhaps the best idea, given that I was drastically, or I was outnumbered. So Maureen was added back into that. We had been going back and forth via email over the weekend, and actually ended up having the Zoom meeting on Monday, which is when kind of the developments that led to the transition to remote for the middle school and high school came up. And at that point, we set aside our look at the dashboard because it wasn't. We had said previously that once there was a school closure, we would be meeting as soon as possible anyway. This was the earliest time that I could post a meeting following that day. So we sort of abandoned the data look, and we moved straight into setting a meeting at that point. So, but real quick, I wanted to take you through real quick just the remaining dashboard. So you see the dashboard has actually been updated a little bit from what you saw last. The new cases are now at the top. The superintendent has the capability to add those real time. So those are in there real time. We added a little note in there to note that as new cases are reported, they're added in there. Changed the format a little after our discussion last week. It is a bit difficult because there are some cases that either, they could span multiple schools. So trying to allocate them into a specific school bucket is difficult. So in that case, we've added this other category, and also added, so to kind of capture those that don't belong in a specific school category. And we've also added close contacts as a column there. Schools and classes that are currently remote are included in there. It says updated weekly on Fridays. I actually should update that even further because the superintendent has been updating that live as that situation changes. So that's going to be kind of a real live update there. Close contacts quarantining from symptoms is there. What's been being added in or made larger, I guess, is the state data. So you can see the new data there for new cases in district towns in the last 14 days. If you mouse over, you can actually get to those values. So as of last Friday's data that they published out, Newbury had 23 new cases in the last 14 days. Raleigh had 10 cases in the last 14 days, and Salisbury had 40 new cases in the last 14 days. So those are increases compared to what we've seen in previous reports. The new daily cases are being updated there on a weekly basis. So those will continue to update. We're loading in essentially 7 days at a time there, so that it's difficult. I mean, obviously we're all volunteers and have other things going on. So it's difficult to get in there and update that on a daily basis. So we're basically loading in 7 days worth of data points at the same time as we load in the state data that's there. The reach by tracer statewide, clearly people are aware of this, I think, given the discussion that was just touched on. The other factors we're updating weekly on Fridays. That's the traffic light that's there. We're updating it on Fridays. I, of course, made the phone calls around to see what was going on with testing in particular today, which is, I just wanted to bring that up because I would envision on Friday that number is going to go up. As of Now Anna Jakes is only taking medically necessary COVID testing appointments. They are, I believe that it says something like swiftly reaching their capacity. So they are doing some limited medically necessary testing there. I was not able to get a turnaround time for them. Also having difficulty reaching convenient MD. I mean, I think these places are just, they're out straight right now with testing. I could go to the kind of the source lab that both of those facilities use. They are quoting currently 2 to 3 day turnarounds on a priority test and 3 to 4 days turnarounds on a general population test. So I would envision, I mean, we'll have that discussion when the data review group gets together later this week, but I would envision that going higher than the green that it is now. I don't know if the superintendent wants to comment on staffing, because that's kind of the other big, big thing that could probably change in that.
I was going to say, I was going to interrupt you if you didn't suggest that, because I would say, so it's currently, that's what I was just looking, it's currently listed as yellow for staffing. I think staffing is approaching red, and that doesn't mean it's the same at every school, but certainly it's ebbing and flowing. And I think whether we talk about the toll that it's taking on staff, or staff that are having to quarantine because of an outside case, a family member, and they're not sick, so they're able to teach remotely, but they can't be in the building. We've certainly had an uptick in the number of individuals that aren't connected to in-school cases, but individuals having to quarantine, and that's students and staff. I would say that, you know, depending on the school on the day, that's been an increasing challenge. So I don't know that I would say it's entirely district-wide red right now, but we are certainly approaching that. And I would say that, you know, for me, as we look to potential other shifts, that would be another significant contributing factor to having to shift a school to fully remote.
All right. Thank you. So that's everything that's included on the dashboard. I see a couple of questions, so I'll go to Linda first.
In regards to the testing sites that are non-existent around here, is it possible that we can, I know we have a meeting, a full meeting next week. Is it possible to reach out to a couple of our senators to possibly ask them to be online to see if they're making any headway with trying to get a testing site? Because when I look at the testing sites around here, there is none for Amesbury, for Georgetown, for Groveland, for the amount of students that are in this specific area. To me, there should be more of a testing site available. To just have CVS and convenient MD, it is not ideal for anybody to be able to get testing. In regards of the staff, and it is disruptive. It is when you have to move from being quarantined. I myself have had to be quarantined from being in close contact at work. It is nerve-wracking, but we're all doing the best we can. We're all trying to make the decisions the best we can. And all 9 of us are trying to make the best decisions that we can make for everybody in this district. The amount of emails and social media that's being on there, we all have to be in this together. And Brian and Narissa, I think, are doing the best that we can to make sure that everybody's safe. So that's all I have to say. But just if we can get next week, 1 or 2 of our senators available.
Yeah, so I don't know if we'll be able to get both senators. I know Senator Tarr in particular, we generally have to book him weeks ahead. That's not generally on a short term, but I may be able to at least get a response from his office. Prior to that, what might be more likely would be getting at least one of the senators and possibly one or more of the representatives.
Yeah, just anybody to try and get a mobile site or something around here with the rise in our never mind.
I hear you. Paul Goldner, and then I'll come to you next, Aaron.
I think just as sort of things of concern, I also saw in today's report that the ICU beds in our region are at capacity 100%. And it looks like non-ICU, the hospitals are pushing towards 100% capacity in the Northeast as well. So that's definitely concerning. So.
Thank you. Aaron?
I also heard that Anna Jakes is running out of tests. They're not going to have much to administer coming up because they're running out of test supplies.
Okay, I'd heard that about the quick rapid tests. Do you know that if that's PCR?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they were specific on what it was. It was an outside source that had told me that they're having issues.
Yeah.
So that might be something else to bring up with the senators.
Yeah. All right. Let's see, Paul, back to Paul Goldner, and then I'll come over to you, Paul Lees. I'll try you again, Paul Goldner. Oh, there we go.
I had finished and never lowered my hand.
Oh, okay, sorry. Straight on to you then, Paul Lees.
So I'm looking at the dashboard, and down in the bottom right-hand corner where it says new cases at TRSD, and it says 1/12-12. Am I looking at the right dashboard?
No, you're probably looking at the old one. If you go out to the Stay Connected site,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
And then click on resources in the top right-hand corner,
Okay.
and then TRSD COVID dashboard new.
Okay.
And it should bring up, it looks like a big blue box.
Yep.
With a bunch of charts and graphs in it.
Yep. And
Got it?
how many new cases do we have in that top box?
In
I thought Brian
what
said 16.
in what time frame?
So it's
The entire time frame.
Yeah, 16 total. One of them was on September 27th.
Okay.
So then the next is, so from November 13th to today, so what is that? 19 days, there have been 15 cases.
Okay. And Brian, how many of those are staff?
5
or 6?
I would have to go through and count. If you want to, I can figure that out.
Do you have another question, Paul, while he's counting? And
No.
I'll just go back to and say we were trying not to get down to definitive where people could be identified. So that's one of the reasons why staff or student and the school is not noted on that report.
Okay. Well, I guess my next question is just geared towards maybe the second part of the agenda, and that is how the staffing is going. So I can defer that until we get to that.
Perfect.
But Brian, about 6 or 7 people, does that sound right since November 13th?
I'm trying to do it without the data. It's fairly split. I will say that. Yeah. So I will get you the exact breakdown.
Anybody else have questions? Paul, is that a hand, Paul Goldner? Not a hand, Paul Goldner. You got a little itchy finger going on there tonight. Okay. I mean, I guess I go through more data, and I just wanted to bring up a couple of other things that I thought were noteworthy about this week's data. So one of those things is the percent positives in the town by town testing report, which is not something that we've looked at in the dashboard traditionally. I think it's, you know, it's one of those things is until it changes, you don't really look at it. Salisbury's percent positive, this positivity rate this week was 5.61%, which was considerably higher than it had been in the past. It's considerably higher than our other towns, and it's considerably higher than the state as well. I think, you know, we don't obviously have our own epidemiologists here, but when I've been, you know, reading through various studies, what that generally indicates is that there are tests that are not being, or cases that are not being detected in the community. There essentially are more cases than are actually being detected. So I think it's just, you know, when we talk about how many data points you want to look at, I just think it's another data point that should be raised as one that's, you know, it's a change and it's a little noteworthy. And then the other thing I wanted to do, and I'll caveat this because when I talked to the superintendent and assistant superintendent about this, they believe possibly that all districts are not reporting their data reliably to DESE. Is that a fair thing to say, a way to sum it up?
It's not my story to tell, but it is even speaking with DESE folks when I report this, right? There's no online submission. I call a hotline and report the cases. They even say this is not a perfect science. They're just trying to get a sense of how it's impacting schools. So one of their questions is, has this individual been in the school in the last 7 days? We've had cases where the individual was not in school the last 7 days, so it wouldn't show up on their report, but they show up on our report with close contacts because of the tracing pattern and when we found out. So, so I think I would just say I believe there are some districts who see that as a useless exercise because I think it ends up being more confusing data versus what we're doing. I can tell you the numbers on this chart are accurate because this is coming from us. So I would say, yes, it's not dead. It is. I don't know that I find that data collection, I find it potentially more problematic than helpful, quite honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's fair. So I would say, you know, take this with a grain of salt. But if you look at the data report that DESE puts out on Thursdays, that does put us quite high compared to other districts. The only other area districts that are kind of up in the same numbers range as Triton are Essex Tech and Masco. In some of those, other than that, I mean, we're kind of sitting up there with the Lowells and Methuen and Fall Rivers as far as the numbers that we have. The vast majority of districts that are in there have very low or no cases reported in that past week. So, you know, when you're looking at 400 different districts, again, there could be some that are not reporting that appropriately or as expected, I guess I should say. But I guess, you know, like I said, it's just one more data point to say out of, you know, 400 districts that are on that report, we're typically sitting in the top 50 when you look at student cases, staff cases, and total cases. So, Paulise?
So I'm not as concerned about how we rank with other districts in the state. My concern is how many teachers do we have in our buildings? How many are missing? You know, are the students being taught? So I don't think the analysis to what other districts are doing has any bearing on what we're doing as a committee here.
That is fair. I will say everyone is considering data points separately. So the data points that you consider may not be the same data points that someone else is considering. I just tried to pull out the things that I found that could be considered noteworthy where they you know, existed in those reports. So, all right. Any other questions or comments on that? So I guess this leaves us at a point here. I mean, we left this open as to take any action deemed appropriate by the committee. So I'd like to hear from the committee. I mean, I think I've heard from some of you already, kind of where areas are concerned are, whether we need to take any additional action here, kind of where your head's at, given that the longer term, you know, falls squarely under the committee's jurisdiction. So Linda, hang on. Ask you to unmute. There you go.
Again, I think it falls under the jurisdiction of Brian as to whether Brian feels that recommends for us to close the schools down and go full remote. But again, it just depends on where things lie. I mean, are we concerned with the safety of everybody in the schools, or are we concerned with the education of our students? I mean, that's what it comes down to. at least if they're in the schools, however many are in the schools, I think they're in a better place where they should be. If we're talking about safety wise, then, you know, it just depends on, I still believe it should be the parents that decide whether they want their kids to be full remote or hybrid. So I think Brian is doing a good job in closing things down when he feels that they need to be. And we have the dashboard, I mean, and I think we need to stay hybrid for the kids that can stay hybrid. I mean, I myself, I know I'm worried about things, but parents have a choice. That's all.
All right. Anyone else? Police?
So I think in order for us to decide whether we're going to take any action or further action, I think we need to hear from the superintendent about the staffing.
Okay. That's your cue, Brian.
Sorry. So specifically, I don't have an exact number of individuals who are out. What I can tell you is, in speaking with the principals today, I think at the high school level, the concern is with the hybrid model, the number of students who are choosing to stay out, not necessarily in the remote academy, if you will, so not in the Florida Virtual Remote Academy, but just staying out, whether it's a concern, valid or otherwise. The hybrid model has been very challenging. The week before Thanksgiving had considerable absences for students. At the staffing, for the staffing at the high school level, I should say there are staffing, we are not properly staffed across the district as a whole. We still have a number of instructional assistants positions that have been open since, I believe some of them, correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle, Kim, since September, right? I mean, literally have been unfilled. And so we have not been at full capacity, and I don't suspect we will be at any point this year. But we to this point have been probably at the expense of our educators who are doing an unbelievable amount of work, but it's taking a toll on them individually. So I think the greatest challenge at the high school is the hybrid model and how it's working and engaging all students. At the middle school and the 3 elementaries, I think the hybrid model is working better. It's then a staffing concern. So it hasn't been a point, and Dave, Kyle, and Kim, correct me if I'm not conveying the hours and hours and hours. We've spun this around with the leadership team. At the elementary, the concern at the elementary and the middle school, it's about staffing and being able to have educators with our students, whether it's a shift to remote or in person, as well as the decisions that create an uptick in the numbers for the remote academy. So as of today, we still continue to work through, I believe it was 4th grade we resolved today, as far as the class sizes for the 4th grade remote academy getting large. So we resolved that. So resolving those issues, but those are, we're not collapsing another hybrid classroom. So we were able to do it without all that impact, but it is absolutely taking a toll. I don't believe we're at a point where we would say the staffing, we need to shut down and shift to fully remote across the board right now. We could be there. I will quote Jim Montanari. Today, right now, we're all set, right? Again, all set is a relative term. But at that moment in time, okay, we're good, we're staffed. And so I think that's where we've been at. And it seems to have ebbed and flowed with the different schools about folks that are out. Certainly there've been, folks who've been talking about since September that, working with Kyle have talked about accommodations or extended leaves of absence. So those folks have been missing and we've largely replaced them with substitutes. But it's the day-to-day. It's I just got to call my whatever, my wife, my son, my mother-in-law. I was with them on Thanksgiving, whatever it is. I just was called and they're positive and I'm a close contact. I have to quarantine. So that's been the greatest impact, is staff who are not necessarily sick, but are needing to quarantine for other outside connections. And so that's, I should say, that's also the case with students as well. A significant number of students, and that number has ebbed and flowed. That's one of the data points on the dashboard that I think we need to clarify to make sure we're counting exactly what we think we're counting. That number is intended to show the quarantine and absence impact not related to any cases in one of our students or staff.
Do you have the number for that for last week? Because that data point is not updated since the 22nd. I was just curious if there was a number for last week or.
I'm working on it. We were moving towards it for Friday. And then at the moment I would like, ooh, that'd be really great to have for tonight. So we're close to having an accurate number, but I didn't want to put it in there without it being accurate.
That's fine. Thanks.
Yeah, I would say that I would just say this, the number, the student absences specifically at the high school right before Thanksgiving break were, I would say, Patrick, I don't think I'd be using hyperbole to say they were alarming. And so, the discussion we had before Thanksgiving was, if that was to continue after the break, then we need to have a serious discussion. So I would say at this point, the attendance rates have been better. However, I think the concern still lies in, with Patrick and speaking for the high school, that hybrid model is just very challenging, given the nature of the students in the classes and the expanse and extent of the classes. So I don't know if I just rambled or actually answered the question, Paul.
I was just going to ask Paul Lees whether that.
It was a little rambled for me, but I'm gonna try a different approach, Brian. As I look at my list of staff that's been out, I find that it's only one at the high school, and the balance of it is Pine Grove and Newbury Elementary. We don't hear anything from Salisbury, and maybe that's something the senior senator, Ms. Witkowski from Salisbury, could comment on at some point. But I'm really concerned, Brian, about the number of staff that we're losing at the lower grades and whether there's a connection between those students being hybrid. And actually, I mean, what happened? Can you just tell us what happens when a staff member goes out with a positive test, say at Newbury Elementary? I mean, what's the district doing for filling that spot?
So it ranges, right? It ranges from, in the case of, we'll say at Pine Grove and Newbury, for the first and the fifth grade, the entire grade level shifted to remote. So those educators largely shift to remote instruction for the classes.
While they're sick, while they're positive COVID?
So I should say, then there's the caveat of if it is a staff member, and again, this is where I can only say so much, if it's a staff member that's actually sick,
right,
then obviously that staff member is sick, and we have subs, right? We keep talking about Kim's super subs, which is all dwindling. But we have a sub who would fill in like they would if they were in the classroom. So it's, if the individual, the majority of the time, those shifts, the majority of the staff have been healthy enough to continue teaching remotely. But sometimes it does include a staff member. And then if we have those super subs available, they've been trained on Google Classroom and all the platforms, so they can jump into that remote setting. I'd love to be able to use names and examples, but obviously I can't. I think it would be a little clearer, but I can't do that. So, and then, so that's when, so the example you asked about was one of our staff or students who's positive. The other piece of that is less kind of a pervasive, which is a spouse, a child of one of our staff members is test positive. So they're just quarantining. So that doesn't impact the rest of the grade level, right? Because it didn't bring a case into the school. One of our staff is just a close contact, which means they need to be out, and we would fill them with a substitute as we would any other position. Not always perfectly, right? I mean, it's at the high school level. At this point, their teachers are often, it's by choice, giving up their planning period. It can be paid an hourly rate to give up their planning to cover a classroom for another teacher. So it's that kind of backfilling that's happening at the high school level. It's pulling instructional assistants to cover classrooms. So I certainly don't want to paint a rosy picture that it's working perfectly. But since September 16th, when we opened in a remote model, we've been understaffed.
Does that answer your question, Paul?
No.
You-
So if there's 6 or 7 staff at the elementary schools that are out now, how many more staff are we going to have to lose at the elementary schools before they go remote?
I think that'd be a case-by-case basis. So it's when the principal says, Brian, we can't do this, right? We're not able to cover the classrooms. And so that depends on the availability of substitutes, long-term, short-term. It's not a static number that I can say to you, this is the figure. That's why I've said it seems to ebb and flowed, where for a while one school is really struggling and then it gets better. Because again, it's short term. So someone may have to quarantine and it may not be, if it happened over the Thanksgiving break, they're not out for a full 2 weeks. It might be 7 days or 9 days more in that period. So that's certainly, as I said, I mean, that's certainly something by whether it's yellow or shifting to red, staffing it has been a concern. It's been yellow and it's shifting to it could absolutely impact. But I would say that would be on a case-by-case, school-by-school basis, not shifting the full district into remote.
Are we getting closer, Paul?
I was gonna say, hopefully that answers.
I'm just trying to elicit information so the committee has something to work with about making whether action steps are appropriate or not.
So are you satisfied with where we're at right now? Shall I go on
We're
Mr.
getting more
Golder?
information,
Getting more?
but we're not willing to draw a line in the sand, and it seems the consensus is simply to leave it up to Brian.
I think the only person we've heard from is Linda so far. So I always like to hear from a quorum of the committee before we move on. So, Brian, I'm going to ask you this one. Do you have a problem if I recognize Tara to speak? Given that she's your employee.
Absolutely. Sorry, you got me mid-sip. I thought I was done for a second. Yeah, absolutely. That's your choice as the committee.
Absolutely. Okay, and then Paul Goldner, I'll come to you afterwards. Sorry. Tara, we can't hear you. Oh, we can see your mouth moving, but not getting any sound. Kind of.
Can you hear now?
Yes, now I can hear you. Nope, we lost you again.
Shut your video off and see if you can just talk.
It's a new Chromebook and I don't have. You can hear me?
Yes. For now.
I'm just trying to. Can you hear me?
No, I think we lost you again. I'm going to go on to Paul Goldner and then I'll try to come back to you afterwards, okay? Hopefully it'll get better.
Can you hear me?
All right. Paul, I'm going to come on to you and then hopefully we'll go back.
Related to Paul Lee's question, and this might be Kyle, have you received in the last week or so any new requests for leave or information concerning what would be required to take a leave?
I have, yep. I would say maybe I've had a few individuals who had reached out earlier on, who had elected to not take a leave, asking for updated information, and maybe 2 or 3 new individuals, I would say. Does that sound about right, Brian?
I was gonna say that sounds roughly. So I think the follow-up to that is, has anyone, I don't believe anyone additional has gone out on leave. People have inquired about opportunity, or has anyone shifted?
In the last 2 weeks, there was one.
There was one.
But not, yeah, I'll leave that alone.
And it looks like Tara's still frozen, so I'm guessing her audio is no better. Tara, if you can hear us, maybe you can try calling in on the call-in number. That might help things.
So Tara's now Trey.
Oh.
So,
Oh, look at that.
So hang on. I just put the imposter Tara into the waiting room. I don't know where she go. So now she's there. Now if we ask, can you hear us, Tara?
Yes,
Okay.
Very tricky.
I know, sorry. So now I'm on my main computer and my son has hijacked it apparently. But anyways, thank you for letting me speak. I just kind of wanted to talk to what I think Paul's looking for is a line in the sand, a direct number of how many staff need to be out before we say we're going to call it. And it's the same thing that I kind of wanted at the beginning when this whole thing started. I wanted a distinct number of how many cases is a cluster, how many cases mean we shut it down. But in learning through this process and being part of it, unfortunately, it's not completely black and white. And today was a good example in Newbury how, yes, we didn't have the staffing and it got to be a complete cluster for a little while in a short period of time where we had to shut down the entire 5th grade, not because they were close contacts, but because we didn't have staffing. But then I thought to myself, you know what? Good on Brian for shutting down, not freaking out and shutting down the entire school, because why should pre-K, K, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 be shut down and taken out of school when school is the safest place for them at the moment? I could speak to both sides of it, but I don't think it was a place to shut down the entire school when we're dealing with one grade level. So I think that's why Brian has to say, and I don't want to speak for you, Brian, but why we're saying it has to be a case by case issue. And certainly there are times where I put my hands up and I'm like, we need to shut it down. It's getting too chaotic. We don't have the staff. But when you actually look at it outside of that and take it number for number, if you're dealing with what you are dealing with as it comes in, as you know the information, I think that's the best way to handle it. And what we know now is only what we know now. And in another week, as transmission and incubation period goes, we might have another in-school transmission, if you know what I mean. So what we know now is, yeah, maybe we had a staff to staff, but in another week, if a couple other kids pop with positive cases or a couple more staff pop, then we can say, oh, okay, so that's how it's impacting us. And then we need to look at it again. But I think just to say, shut the whole thing down is, I don't know, slightly drastic. And I just feel like part of me sometimes wants that, but also part of me understands kids need to be in school as well, and handling it on a case-to-case basis is probably the best thing we can do, so we don't impact the entire district. That's all.
Thanks for that perspective, Tara.
Yes, thank you. Paulise?
I just have a follow-up question, Tara. When
yeah.
you talk about it's the safest place for them, you're obviously referring to the students.
Well, yes. Yeah.
My concern is the staff, because Triton is only as good as the teachers that it puts in front of the students, whether it's remote or in person.
Correct.
My concern is what Brian said at the outset, is that we're basically split almost 50-50 with staff being infected and students being infected. And that's my concern that I just want to keep bringing back in front of the school committee, because if we don't have staff, or we have the super subs or maybe some not so super subs standing in the capacity as teachers, we're not delivering an educational product, which is what our goal is.
So I'm just going to jump in because it's not fair to put Tara as a staff member making a judgment about other staff. So I'm just going to say no to that one. But I will say I counted, it's 6 staff, 9 for the 15. It's 6 staff and 9 students. So for the 16 total dating back to the September 27th, it's 6 staff and 10 students total is the breakdown, I think, if I have my math correctly. I'm rehashing all the cases off of that chart without names. So that's slightly dangerous. Thanks, Tara.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Linda? Should ask you to unmute. I think. Yep, there you go.
Thank you, Tara. That was very helpful. And that was the reason why I said it should be deferred to Brian and his staff to make the call of shutting it down, because he's in the school and he understands what needs to be done more than the school committee does. That's all.
So I just want to echo what Tara said, but also what she said, in the moment, it's hard to make the right decision. So when I'm not at Newbury today, right? When Beth and Tara are sitting there trying to go through this, I have to be the one to say, okay, let's ask this question, let's ask this question, because the reality is when you're dealing with it, it seems huge and it seems massive as you go through and you peel back the layers, and after the fact you realize, okay, like we've got this. And when we say, okay, right, as Tara alluded to, when we say, okay, not sure we got this, we say, okay, the right answer here is to shift the whole grade remote. So I don't want to minimize that process of the impact on the nurses, on the principals who are doing this with, hand in hand with the nurses and the rest of the staff around the school. I certainly don't want to minimize that at all.
Thank you. Tina?
I just want to echo Linda's sentiment in terms of the fact that I do agree that I feel like Brian is the one that is dealing more directly with the leadership team, staff, and nurses at each of the schools, and that I believe that dealing with it on a case-by-case basis instead of shutting the whole thing down, which I think would be more of a detriment to the community as a whole, is something that I would be in favor of. But I really think that should fall on Brian. I think it's powerful hearing from Tara as well, too, as a school nurse. So if the school says to Brian, we can't handle this, or this grade, we need to shut it down, that's more powerful than us discussing hypotheticals or trying to figure out what's going to happen in the future when it hasn't happened. So I just want to say that I echo what Linda said. And then I know that there's been a concern amongst the remote parents. I don't know if this is the appropriate time to throw out this question now, but to ask in terms of what a contingency plan is obviously if someone wants to transition from one model to the next, that changes things in terms of staffing and numbers and support. But I feel like there's some people that might want to transition temporarily that are in hybrid, for example, or to remote. So speaking to the absences that you noted, where people are like, okay, I'm in hybrid, I want to be in hybrid, but I don't feel comfortable coming to school, I'm just not going to show up. I'm wondering, is there a way that we can still serve them in the hybrid model without having to shift them to remote to upset those remote classes that are already created?
So if I don't want to, Kim and Anna have lived this day in and day out. So if Kim has something to add, a temporary shift is very challenging. I will say that.
Right.
So what we've been addressing is the larger class sizes. And so adding additional staff for specifically the elementary. And so just by way of numbers, we're currently sitting at 200. So as of October 27th, we were at, in the remote academy, we were at 264, currently sitting at 268. I believe right before the break, we looked at, there was a waiting list, I think it was 6 or 7, and that waiting list is currently 13. So those are individuals. I'm just looking at some of the class sizes. So there's several new numbers that have emerged since the Thanksgiving holiday. So because we've made new remote classrooms, having a student join that classroom for 2 weeks is very challenging. Our hope at this point has been, we had to have that whole kind of shake up at the elementary level of collapsing classrooms in the traditional hybrid in-person to create those remote learning classrooms. And we're trying to create these additional sections without collapsing any more hybrid sections. So that has been what Kim is doing 24 hours a day, is brainstorming to solve these problems. But it is very challenging to shift them fully to remote for a short term. So we have worked, I know there's the principals and teachers have worked with families on a case-by-case basis if there's an extenuating circumstance. If someone's quarantining for 2 weeks, we work with them to address that for a 2-week period. But for someone to say, I need, using MLK weekend as that kind of 2 weeks after the New Year holiday, to say I want to just go remote until then, that isn't something that we can easily accommodate. So Kim, is something.
Right.
And I would just say those numbers have, Tina, ticked up, the families that are requesting to do kind of this temporary remote situation. And so we did, we obviously discourage that because it's it's disruptive for the child's education. But on the other hand, we understand because of the circumstances. So we also know that in some circumstances, teachers are streaming and the kids are at home and they're not in school and they're not enrolled in any remote. So they're almost creating like their own remote situation. And we're trying to work with families and teachers to limit that. I will say that I think it was today, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, at one point, Patrick was saying we have more kids out than we actually have in the building because of kids who have either joined the Florida virtual or who have chosen to stay out of school because of fear that they were going to get exposed or because they traveled or for a variety of reasons. And that's the point that you have to question, is this model working and what's our next step? Because around every corner, the situation is creating new challenges that we have not been able to anticipate thus far. Doesn't mean we can't address them and find solutions, but it certainly is creating new challenges.
Right. I'd imagine so. And like you said, it differs in terms of the case-by-case basis, whether it's at the high school, middle school, or elementary school level. My understanding of the elementary school level with the hybrid, I'm almost wondering if people are in hybrid and want to shift to remote, the teachers have those lesson plans throughout the week. So if you can work with a teacher to agree to keeping them in hybrid, but not keeping them in the school, and if they're not streaming and agreeing to asynchronous days versus, the family has to agree to that and the teacher has to understand that, versus dumping them into a remote class that's already at max capacity to shift things around. That just doesn't seem fair to the remote students. So I think whatever we can do to handle it by a case-by-case basis, I think is probably the best that you guys can do right now, it sounds like. Thank you.
Thanks, Tina. Kaylee?
This is kind of to Tina's question. I obviously don't know how it's working at all of the schools, but high school, from what we've been seeing, being students in physical brick and mortar, she's right, a lot of kids are just choosing to not come in. I had one class where there were 4 students in the room when we had a COVID full room, like classroom. And a lot of people are just hopping online or everything, but a lot of the issue too is from what I've been hearing from the students, there are a lot of kids that would have chosen fully remote, but they aren't satisfied with Florida virtual. So they've then either switched back or they've just never applied because they know that it's not what they need. So it's definitely an issue that's coming up with a lot of students that I've been hearing from.
Yeah, that's definitely it's I think you said it, Kim, it's almost like because students don't want to shift to Florida virtual, they're like creating their own remote academy and not ever coming in for the in-person days. And if a teacher's streaming, that might work out okay. But for the classrooms that aren't streaming, they're never getting that in-person instruction with teachers rather. And that's to the point that I was sharing with you that Patrick wasn't making. I was making for Patrick, that he was sharing his concern that it's the hybrid model has been very challenging at the high school level for sure, and growing more so by the day.
Really has something to add. Hang on a second. There we go.
Isn't it true that the high school failure rate right now is like over 200% what it was last year?
You cut out when you said the number, but it's
sorry,
double.
It's like over a 200% increase from what it was last year. Is that correct?
It's about double what it was last year. Yeah.
Okay. Because I had heard that thrown around, so I just wanted to get that clarified. Thank you.
Paul Mayette. Hang on a second and I'll unmute you. There you go.
So I want to put this out there just so we're hearing just another way of looking at things. I think this is not questioning how Brian's handled things. I think he's been right on top of things, but his ability to chase things down is going to have to be reactive. That is what the tools he has at his disposal. We are the only ones who can act proactively. And I do think we need to take a good look at the numbers. It's very clear where they're headed. We've had a lot of talk about the numbers not yet in the buildings, justifying things, but we can see trends. You know, if Kyle was spending us into debt, we would have to stop that well before the bank account had a negative number in there. And clearly we're close to the point where we have, you know, every metric that you've discussed at the start of this, every time that moves, we lose a little bit of control. I do worry about staff who don't have a choice. Parents do, staff do not. And even without some of the heavier things that we've talked about, just the day-to-day, it's a different experience going in and trying to carry that load day-to-day. It's maybe something that's easy to overlook at times, simply because of the fact that we as humans can grow accustomed to a difficult experience, and thank God we can. But I think that there's going to come a time when people look at this and say, this has become too much, or maybe it was too much, I don't know. It doesn't sound as though there is an appetite for moving any faster than we are right now, just listening to the other committee members, but I don't know. I'm certainly uncomfortable with where we are. And I don't know. I don't know what to say next as far as that goes. But I don't know.
That's fair. Very fair, I think. Thanks, Paul. Maureen.
I totally understand where you're coming from, Paul. I think, you know, we're all in such a tough position. But I just keep going back to, you know, I'm not an educator, I'm not a teacher. So I have to, you know, go back to what Brian is saying and our experts are saying. And I really appreciated everything that Tara said tonight, because I think it kind of captured the way I feel is the best approach right now. I think the way that the situation unfolded at Newbury today was the way it's supposed to work. You know, Brian sort of made the decision to put the 5th grade into remote due to a staffing issue. I think that staffing is something, I mean, I'm hearing that is a huge concern, and we have to certainly keep our eye on that. But I just don't think that we are at a point where we would shut down a whole school or the district. So I want to keep listening to what everybody, you know, our experts are telling us. That's sort of where I'm trying to, you know, form my decisions.
Thanks, Maureen. Oh, Caitlin, you're unmuted.
Thanks. Or my hand instead. So I'm kind of, if you think of a seesaw, I'm kind of sitting in the middle of it, because I hear, and I think I've said this, I go around and around in my head, because on one side you have Paul Mayette's point, which was so well spoken, and I echo it in so many of my thoughts. And then you have Linda's point on the opposite side of my seesaw, and I echo so many of those thoughts, and I just stand in the middle. But I think where, Paul, you and I diverge, and it's small, but it's kind of big in the sense, I'm not sure how many families have a choice. in one direction or another. So when I look at like a hierarchy of needs and I look at base needs and meeting them, that's my sticking point. I'm not sure if shutting down will then take away a family's access or a child's access to basic needs and education. Because if they're remote and there is a population that if they do go remote, safety wise, health wise, yes, but then that might not be where that family puts their weight for a decision. They may need to put the weight in the decision in childcare and working, or in education, being in person because remote just failed their family in some way. And that is what I keep going back to when I go around and around when I think of choice. I can't figure out if there is a true choice for a lot of our families. And that's kind of pretty much the only place where you and I think, diverge in thought. But I echo everything and the weight that our educators and the staff are carrying. And I also try to think of the weight that each family carries with every decision that we make as a school committee and every decision Brian makes. There's this weight that we don't always see the full impact of, which is why I keep trying to stay hybrid as long as I can to remove some of that weight. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know, but that's kind of where my thinking is. So when I'm on the seesaw, I kind of try to think of where my weight would go and where other people's weight would go to have the impact and the choice. So that's it. That's all I got.
So can I just,
go ahead, Brian.
Just as a perspective. So I think the challenge is you've got the 4 district leaders and the school committee members sitting around the screen here with seesaw is the perfect example or the perfect synonym. If you put the leadership team with the principals around the table when we together, it's just as around and around and around. If you grabbed a group of teachers, put them in a room, it's around and around and around. You put IA, it doesn't matter who it is, that there is no good, clear path forward in these situations. So I think that's an important point, that through everything that you're deliberating through, there isn't any greater clarity, regardless of who's having the discussion.
Thanks, Brad. I just want to take a minute here too and say we have 2 new members who hopped on in the middle of a pandemic, and I just heard some tremendously good work on both of your parts. I remember my first year, I barely opened my mouth, which you probably can't believe now. But kudos to both of you, because you have jumped in clearly and are putting forth opinions that are, thought out and kind of holding your own with everybody that's been on here, in some cases for 10 years. So good on both of you. That's tremendously well done. Paul Goldner, you put your hand up, hand down. All right.
So I think in that sort of that question of the hierarchy of needs, I think one of the places we're headed right now is today was the first day that you would see any impact from Thanksgiving, and it was 4,600 cases, basically twice what we've been seeing. And that number is going to go up statewide for a week or so. Just that's what happened over Thanksgiving with how many people traveled and how many people were in larger gatherings than maybe they should have been. But even at that, the small gatherings now are spreading even when there's only one extra person in the household. And some of what we've talked about tonight with those high numbers means that we're going to have more and more people who are forced to quarantine for cases that aren't in school. And we've already seen basically a case a day for the last week and a half in our schools. So all of those cases are going to pull people into quarantine and staffing. And the result of that is going to be more and more chaos over the next few days. And that chaos is about people's health and safety. And the hierarchy of needs, that health is the first one. That's it. If you're not physically safe, if you don't feel physically safe, that's the bottom. And it's not going to be individualized. It's going to be, it's more and more. And I think Kaylee and Brian have touched on it as well, that the high school students are saying it's not worth it. So I'm not going to be in, I'm going to choose to be absent. And a lot of that is feeling not safe already. And as the numbers get worse and worse over the next week or two, or possibly month, because of the holidays coming up, then more and more and more people are going to feel not safe. And what's that going to do to the school environment?
Thanks, Paul. Anyone else? So, I mean, I have a few thoughts. I want to say first, I'm incredibly infuriated with the state leadership because I believe a lot of this is in our laps because of the unwillingness to act. One of the things that I keep hearing is that, you know, schools should be open. Well, what a lot of other countries have done is they've shut other stuff down so that schools can remain open, and that's not happening here, and that makes me incredibly angry. We shouldn't be in this situation. If things had been shut down, if there wasn't indoor dining, if there wasn't, you know, a lot of the higher risk activities that we started to come out of the early months of 2020 and things started to open up, we probably would not be in this situation today that we're in. And it's out of our control, and I find that tremendously frustrating. I want to come back to two things that are kind of the deal breakers here for me. One of them is testing. I think it's all well and good to say we don't have cases, that we could react quickly, that you know, we think we could contain it. I don't think that testing right now is at a place where we can confidently say that. I am very concerned, not just about inside the building, but if we have, you know, significant numbers of close contacts, one of the things that we've always said is we have large numbers of siblings in the district, but the siblings don't have to go out if their brother, sister is a close contact, because that close contact in theory is going to get tested and have results come back before they would be, you know, there would be a transmission period and their sibling would be back in the school. And we're not in that situation anymore. It doesn't have to be a sibling. It could be, you know, parent child, it could be child parent, because we have lots of people in different relationships in this district that are in multiple grades, multiple schools. You know, I mean, I know families that have 4 kids, 5 kids that are in different grades throughout the district. So that is a huge concern for me right now. I don't feel like we have the capacity to keep people safe. And all due respect to the superintendent, I know that he's taking that into an account, but for me, that's to my point to Paul Lees, you know, we're all going to have different things that are kind of the point for us. And that's going to vary by person, depending on, you know, who we are and where our judgments are. And this is a big one for me. It has been since the beginning of our conversations that we have to be able to test and we have to be able to contact trace so that we can react and keep people in our building safe. And I don't believe that we can do that right now, not with the testing the way it is. My other concern, and I'm just gonna, this is not, and I told you so, but my big concern about having students in the buildings is we need to keep our high risk kids there as much as we can. And what happened this week was that the middle school and high school teetered over the edge, and not only did all the students that were in hybrid go out, but the high risk students who had been in 4.5 days a week also had to go out for 2 weeks. And that was one of my fears in not calling a 2-week break after Thanksgiving, was that was going to happen. And that in fact did happen. And I'm worried about what happens next if that happens at the elementary schools, rather than, you know, a middle school and high school. There are definitely students at the middle school and high school who cannot learn remotely. But I believe it's much more intensive at the elementary schools. And we're potentially going to run into a situation where those kids are out of the buildings for 2 weeks when they may not, I mean, I don't know, you know, exactly what middle school and high schools could have looked like, right? But there's the potential that this didn't have to take out the entire school, that those kids that need to be in the buildings most could have stayed there. Those are the two big things for me. I think now is the time to go back to remote. I'm just those two things. I would hope that testing would improve. You know, as time goes on, I just feel like this is the point now where we need to try to keep those high risk kids in, and where we need to protect, to Paul's point, staff, since we know, you know, staff to staff has kind of been the way that any in-school transmission is going to go. We need to protect the staff so that we can actually keep our schools going. And the testing capacity and turnaround times right now, I think it's putting way too much risk on the things that actually keep a school going. Does anyone want to say anything? Police?
Make a motion, I'll second it.
I don't know what the motion is. I mean, I guess that's the big question, right? I don't want to make this in my mind, should it be an extended period of time? I don't think so, because my hope would be that at least testing would rebound. Maybe they move a stop the spread site up here. Maybe that somehow they reinforce the sites that we already have. I don't know what that is. But, you know, so I don't know if that's a 2-week time period. I don't have a calendar in front of me, hang on.
If you did the next 2 weeks, there's then 2.5 days before the holiday break.
Then I would guess I would say through the holiday break, and with an intent to come back on January 4th, it looks like. Is that right?
If it was through the holiday break, yes. And you're saying pre-K through 12?
I would like to leave high risk in the hope that you could move to a mitigation strategy. Even if that high risk, I mean, this is the one thing that we struggled with all along, right? I would even say if we could move students who are on IEPs, who are currently in hybrid, they're not considered high risk, and keep them, somehow do something for them, I think we should. But I think somehow we have to protect our most at-risk learners. And that's what, in doing this, that's what I would hope would happen as much as we can, is protect those high-risk learners. Caitlin?
So give me a sec. Okay, so NES, we have a 5th grade out. Is that the only elementary school with a whole grade out right now? Did the 1st grade come back?
Tomorrow at Pine Grove.
So the high school has high number of absences and high number of close contacts still occurring currently, this moment, right now?
So yeah, I mean, it's been Pine Grove, Newbury in the high school and middle school since Thanksgiving, but it wasn't just the sheer number at the middle and high school. It was it's the details surrounding the cases, the time, with the duration of time it went before we were notified and such.
Is that a question, or are you formulating a thought?
I don't know if I like my own thought, so I'll throw it out there, but it kind of goes against what I just said. So it's because you said something that I'm thinking of it, is there a way to keep elementary schools open and then high risk at the high school, middle school come back? But not knowing where the cases are at the middle and high school make it so that that might not even be a valuable option. Because if the cases are within the high risk community of the middle and high school, it doesn't have purpose. So I guess that's.
Yeah, so I would say, you certainly have the right to override me, but I would suggest against bringing our high priority students back before the end of next week, because that was a mitigation measure that involved, to be honest, high priority students as well, right? So the cases were expansive enough that it warranted a 14-day separation on the campus. So yes, I would say after that, then that proposal of bringing the high priority kids back, which would in essence be the week and a half before the holiday break. So you're saying keep the,
I guess I'm going to stick to where I started on my little seesaw and try not to like shift. So I want to keep eyes on the maximum number of students. Ideally, it would be any student healthy enough to attend school in the hybrid model, but understanding that that might not be a reality. So what is the alternative to get the highest number of Triton students in the building for the longest amount of time? So high school, middle school seems to have the most contact, like the most pervasive issue. So after their 14-day quarantine, if you bring back the high needs at the high school, middle school, and then leave the rest remote, can we bring back keep the 3 elementaries open and untouched?
You still run into the test.
Yeah.
My perspective only.
Yeah.
You still run into testing being an issue. I mean, I don't want to use anybody's family as an example, but let's say that they have, 3. Let's say that they had 3 kids at Newbury Elementary, right? One of them is in that 5th grade group that's quarantining, right? That student goes and gets tested. The test results take a week to turn around. In the meantime, the other 2 siblings are in those buildings. They've been in close contact, in contact with the quarantined student in their household, and that provides enough time that if the close contact is going to be put on positive and a sibling is going to become positive, they're back in school in their transmission period.
Okay, I understand.
And that's my big concern.
And it is a concern.
Is that we can't say that we can control this. We may not know until it's too late. And I will say I've gone back and forth too. I'm a million times. I understand that there are students that are in hybrid, not considered high risk, that are having extreme difficulty learning. I would like to help as many of them as reasonably possible, but I think the risk to staff, right, and to other students, and then through them to their families, is considerable when we may not know for a week that someone's positive. There could be somebody that was tested before Thanksgiving that hasn't gotten their results yet, based on some of the anecdotal turnaround times that I've heard, which is where we're at, since it's really hard to get a hold of anybody. Caitlin, did you have something else to say, or do you want?
No, I'm just still working it out.
I hear you.
Thank you.
Paul Goldner.
Just to that point that you're making, we know a whole family who tested positive, being the close contact of a close contact, and that middle step never tested positive. So that's sort of that point you're talking about, that a 5th grader comes home from NES as a close contact, and then they have siblings and they're that close contact and they spread it to the whole family. that would be that sort of scenario. So.
So I go back to, I don't know what the right answer is here. I recognize that having high risk students in is still a risk to students and staff. I think it's about minimizing it, right? In my mind, right? You can't ever make it go away. It's about minimizing it. And I think the way to minimize it is to remove as many other students from the building as you can to try and balance out education versus health. Kaylee?
I completely agree with what's going on. I think the biggest issue that is coming forth for me is that a lot of these high risk students that we have, when they're coming in on those off days, they aren't going to their regular classroom. They aren't getting the one-on-one that people are thinking what they're getting with their teachers. They're sitting in a different room with an IA, zooming into the classes like someone else, like everyone else that's at home is, except they have someone to help them when they can't read something or to teach them how to click a button. And we can't say that is the level of education that you can't get at home. We need to have the people that need that access and the additional help in places where they can get that additional access. But I'm having issues with saying that a kid who is high risk isn't going into the community, doesn't have parents that are working, won't be ever in contact with anyone, and say that a regular a student that isn't marked as high needs is going into the community and high needs students aren't.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point, right? There are families that are going into the community that have a high risk student. I also think where there's a situation like that, we're going to have something like what's happening at the middle school, high school right now, where all of those students are out. It may come to that, right? This is a mitigation strategy to try and keep, to your point, granted, there are a wide variety of high risk, but I'm particularly thinking of students in an autism spectrum disorder classroom, and they you know, it's not that they're getting a little extra help, it's that's it for them. That's what they need. That's that's the level of support that they need. I don't know. So I guess maybe the motion will fail, but I come back to Paul's question. So I guess the motion I guess the first thing I would do is I would put in a request to the superintendent to look at high risk again. And I know that's a lot to ask, but I feel like if we're making a longer transition, then maybe that's something that can be done that couldn't be done on a short-term basis, just to see who really needs to be in and who, you know, maybe some get added, some get subtracted. I don't know how that works. You know, you were talking in your memo about adding kindergarten into those high risks, which I think is fantastic because I think those kiddos can't learn at home. You know, that's extremely difficult for a kindergartner. So
when you say high priority, meaning the kids who are coming 5 days a week, not high risk. Okay.
Sorry, high priority, yes.
And that is ebbing and flowing. Certainly preschool and kindergarten, we would consider high risk, or I'm sorry, now I'm saying it, high priority. But those numbers are absolutely ebbing and flowing on a daily basis.
Okay.
The challenge becomes, we've maxed out the numbers when they're also coming in because they're part of a cohort. And if they become part of both cohorts, then that taps out our capacity in rooms. So that becomes challenging on the shift back.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, I think even if some of them could, I don't know if it's possible to stay on a hybrid schedule or something like that, so they don't leave their cohort. but they're considered high priority enough to continue to come. I don't know where that line is. That's one that I would definitely defer on. Erin?
That was going to be my comment, that just because we identify someone as a high priority doesn't mean that they need to come in every day. If they're on a hybrid program right now and they're already identified as high priority and they're in one of the 2 cohorts coming in 2 days, we shouldn't then open it up so that it diminishes the capacity for the cohorts on the opposite days.
Yeah. Paul Goldner? Hang on, you're muted.
Is it possible to bring in high priority students for pull-out services only when they have those? It's just a question for the superintendent. Can we get those students in on a minimal basis just for the time when they're having services that are not in the context of the general education classroom?
Yes, we can, but we then have to provide transportation, and that becomes completely untenable to bring someone in for an hour, half hour, 90 minutes, whatever the block is. So we talked about that. That would be ideal if we could say, parents, you have to bring your child in, but we couldn't do that. So love the thought, doesn't actually play out, unfortunately.
Kaylee? Yeah, there you go. Should be good to go.
I was just wondering, do we have that option in place for the families that works for them? If a student gets pulled for certain things and needs those access, do they have the option as of right now to just send their student in during those time slots? Or is that something that's not feasible?
So within the hybrid model?
Any of the models?
Yeah, so no, because we wrap our staffing around whatever model we have in place. So if it's, at this moment in time, the middle school and the high school is fully remote. So special educators have to figure out services for students who are fully remote. In hybrid, they're scheduling some students who are in person. Sometimes it's at the same time as some who are remote. Sometimes it's alternating days. So the staffing has to go to the model. And then, so no, there's no easy way to offer that.
Brian, can I ask if the district shifted to remote and we were bringing in high priority students, would busing still be able to be used for the high priority students who do use busing now?
Yep. So that was when we were in fully remote. We had whatever the number, I probably call it 300 students coming in on a daily basis, and those bus routes, it'd be different, right? It's ebbed and flowed. There are students who were high priority who are no longer, and vice versa. But yes, we would have the bus runs able to do that. Yep.
Are there any other questions, Tina? You're muted.
I'm gonna go in a little different direction here, see if I can lighten the mood, but can you guys maybe talk to us about what's going right since we've switched to hybrid and some of the positive things that we see and that you'd like to continue to see if we do stay in hybrid?
Certainly. Kim, anyone else can jump in. It is still not the ideal, right? And I would say certainly full in-person is what teachers are trained for, what teachers are provisioned for, what their mind, what they're geared up for. Teachers have risen to the occasion, and I keep saying this, but at a cost, because teaching hybrid for those that are streaming and doing, teaching to students in front of them as well as at home, or trying to figure out the synchronous, asynchronous, it is a tremendous amount of work. So I'd say one of the greatest successes is the teachers rising to the occasion, all of our educators, to create a viable model. As I had said, right now, it's probably and Kaylee noted, it's the most struggle at the high school right now. But as I've heard from teachers and parents, one of the most consistent, and students, the most consistent positives is it's the connection, right? It's the piece that's missing in remote, when you don't ever actually get to be physically present with your peers and with your teachers. So there's tremendous value to that. And I would say that that is absolutely the most, hands down, the most significant positive impact.
And I can add, just having this conversation with a special educator at one of the schools, and she had mentioned having the high priority kids in the school alone without the rest of the student body allowed them to really work. I don't want to say closely, within 6 feet, but working and overseeing their ability to navigate the online platform, to really kind of zone in on what those skill sets that those students needed to develop in order to be successful when the other students came in, as well as that particular group of students really creating their own cohort. And she said for some of them, they may or may not have been friends if not put in this situation. And so she said watching that just not only had positive implications of this year, but also having her rethink how they do summer tutoring and doing it before school to get them ready for the year and switching. The other piece that I have heard from teachers is just their comfort level now along the lines of the technology and the different platforms. They were able to do within a short amount of time that on a regular year would have taken, I would say not even a year, but years to do. And that's credited to all of their time and dedication, that they have to doing the best job that they can. As far as streaming, I just talked to a couple different groups of teachers today, and though we're not there at 100% yet, we have seen more teachers kind of going in that direction and continuing to move in that direction. I am getting more requests for technology as far as microphones and cameras, which is really great. So yeah, there certainly has been some positive aspects of this, and there are certain things that we will take with us as lessons learned through all of this that have made us stronger, more united in our dedication to the students and each other's social and emotional well-being. And I know we're not supposed to say anything negative, but I always keep saying that's the piece that I worry about is our staff, that this is tough. And then we're just in December. So they're working hard and they're feeling it. They have a lot on their shoulders, as everybody does, but.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a concern, and to, from what Paul Mayette said and the educators that we've heard speak within our own committee, that everyone's being pushed to the brink, right? Teachers are being pushed to the brink. It's 2020, everyone's been pushed to the brink. But my only concern, and I'm sort of on that seesaw with Caitlin, and generally as a rule of thumb, I understand that it's good and it's prudent to be proactive, but I'm just not comfortable without having Brian or the leadership team come to us and say, this is exactly what we think we should be doing. Like if he came tonight saying we need to shut it all down because of XYZ, then I might feel more comfortable making a vote on that. But without that, I don't know. And personally, I'm just speaking on, where I'm at. I don't know that I would be comfortable moving in that direction at this very moment in time. So that's where I'm at on my seesaw.
Thanks, Tina. Paul Goldner.
For the two things based on what was just said, and also the specific circumstances that we're seeing in our district, where if we do decide to spend some amount of time over the next few weeks in a remote model, I would be urging that teachers not be in the same room together at all where possible. it seems like maybe some of our transmissions, and as a result, the having to shut down the grade levels is coming from is teachers collaborating, which is important, but at the same time, right now, perhaps it should be done remotely. Because if we go remote and then our teachers continue to transmit to each other, we're not going to get out of it. And then the other thing is that I, you know, who's being pushed to the edge, and right now what I sort of see it on the very near horizon is our hospitals being pushed to the edge. There's 2 COVID unit nurses on my street, and they're at the edge. And our hospital capacities in this region are at the edge. And if those go down, then we're not going to be then our death rate is going to go up. Our long-term implication rates are going to go up in this region. So I do feel that we need to be proactive. Feel we need to protect and insulate our students and our communities, and also protect ourselves from a slow collapse of this grade level's going out, that grade level's going out, because I think that creates more chaos. And that's, I think, the reactive model of where we're going to be if, 5,000 cases a day.
Narissa, I think you're talking, but you're muted.
Yeah.
No one else can tell you, sorry.
I had it all thought out too. I'll make a motion to, all right, sorry, I should ask first, does Lily Paul Lee had something else to say, because that was the first thing I asked, was if there are any other questions or comments.
No, Madam Chair, I was just going to ask you to make a motion.
All right, well, that's where I was headed anyway, thank you. I'll make a motion to move the district into remote learning through January 4th, with the exception of high priority learners at the elementary schools who would stay in the entire time, and high priority learners at the middle school and high school who would return on December 14th. Is that right, Brian?
Monday is December 14th, yeah.
December 14th, okay. I thought I was remembering that date right.
I'll second the motion.
Can I ask when you're suggesting that's effective?
That,
I mean, this week is massively problematic. You've got, it's whatever time it is on Wednesday night, you've got Thursday, and then you've got Friday.
I know.
And you're saying, so if we're considering preschool and kindergarten high priority, you're saying 1 through 12 then is remote through January 4th?
With the exception of the high priority learners at those grades. Yes. So I think, I mean, as much as I think this is an urgent, I would say Monday to give people time to prepare and transition, I guess. And I don't love the idea of making it tomorrow, for instance. So that would be Monday, let me grab a calendar.
7th.
Yes, Monday, December 7th. Thank you. Any discussion? I'm going to unmute people because we need to do a roll call vote. Hang on. Caitlin's already unmuted. Tina. Is that everybody? All right, roll call vote. Aaron?
What about discussion?
Yes. Oh, sorry, what?
What about discussion?
I said discussion.
She did call for a discussion. Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I thought I had.
Yep.
Yeah.
You did.
Aaron?
Yes.
Paul Goldner?
Yes.
Maureen?
No.
Caitlin?
No.
Paul Lees,
Yes.
Linda,
No.
Paul Mayette,
Yes.
Tina.
No.
All right, and I'm a yes, so that's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 yeses and 4 no's, which would pass the motion. I hate that we're split. I understand that a lot of people don't agree with the decision. I don't know. I wish we could go back to the days where we kind of all agreed and this was easier. And our hardest thing was deciding on a budget line item and what should be funded at, you know, $12,000 higher than it was last year. I don't know. I don't know what to say about it other than that. So, Brian, do you need any more from the committee on that item?
I don't believe so. No.
Okay. Moving on to discussion regarding the data review group. So I would anticipate still having the data review group. That group, like I said, was widened to include Maureen, who, as another school committee member. One of the things I think that I've seen done well in other districts that I would like to see more of here, and I think it would take some of the pressure off of the superintendent to be representing lots of different viewpoints, is to add some healthcare individuals to that group, because right now he's essentially serving as the go-between between the health departments and our healthcare staff that we have in the district, and the data review group. So my suggestion, and I didn't want to make such a drastic decision before I ask the committee, would be to reach out to the health agents and see if one or all of them would be willing to weigh in on those weekly data reviews, and also see if Brian and I talked about maybe Tara being on those data reviews as well. So I don't know if there are any comments, thoughts on that, if people are in agreement with making that group a little broader than we initially thought it was going to be. Oh, Goldner, hang on a second, I'll mute you.
I think having health officials there can't hurt.
Okay. Yes. Maureen, you're still unmuted if you wanted to say something.
Oh, no, I think having the addition of Tara would be really helpful, because, you know, as I said to you, Narissa, like, I just, when we reviewed the data from last Friday, you know, I just struggled like to figure out what am I looking for. And I think having a health expert involved is ideal. So, and like you said, it'll take some pressure off of Brian too.
Yeah, I think having Tara as a district, you know, lead nurse, and then Kristen Jolivet, who's doing the district-wide tracing, and then opening it up to the health agents for the 3 towns. They're not, you know, necessarily the nurses doing the tracing, but they certainly have the kind of the town-wide perspective. So I don't think all of them would be able to be there all the time, but certainly broadening that discussion would be helpful for sure.
Okay. Any objections to adding those individuals? All right. And then the other question was, this is one that Brian and I had when we were setting up the agenda for December 9th, would be, do you want to have a data dashboard review on like a regular business meeting, just to have a specific look at that one time a month? Or are we assuming that people are looking at that on a weekly basis anyway, or daily, sometimes minute to minute basis, and would be contacting me or Brian if they wanted to have a meeting specifically about it? I'm not sure if we just add it as a standing item. or if it's something that we leave off and it's only on a specialty basis to go through that data.
Can I just say something? I think that it should be just something that we're checking on a regular basis. I mean, our business meetings are so long anyways, to add in that. I mean, we should be checking that data regularly. Brian's updating it daily at this point. So, I mean, certainly my understanding of it is that we created it so if there was a reason for it to be discussed, we'd be calling a meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You could do a quick review of it, certainly, of what we've been looking at, but I don't know. I don't know. I'd like to know how other people feel.
Anybody have strong opinions? Caitlin, you're already unmuted.
I don't know if it's a strong opinion. I just, I agree that with Maureen. I just have a question. We talked when Brian wrote the not so lengthy wordy memo.
Touche.
Maybe did we discuss having you do that on a semi-regular basis? And if so, could you just add like a blurb of like what happened in those data and like a quick little, like if it's not big enough to call a meeting, but something was said of importance from one of the health officials or something came up, just like a bullet point at the end that, you know.
To the committee? Are you saying to the committee or the community?
The committee.
The committee. So a memo from each of those weekly meetings.
I don't know, just like a sentence.
Right, or a blurb, a whatever. Not
Yeah.
a organism, right? Not the 4-pager, but a couple paragraphs about.
Well, because we're all looking at it anyway, but we won't all be in the meeting. But I think the point of the meeting is to only have us all looking at it. If you need to call a meeting, but if something of note comes out of it.
That makes sense.
And I have to say, if it's of that much note, I mean, we had this was kind of the beginning of the data review that we got to before the phone call came in, was that if there was anything that was concerning, we'd err on the side of caution and call a meeting rather than kind of wait. And I think that was sort of where we were, is, you know, Maureen had concerns. I had some concerns, right? And we were kind of talking about like, did those concerns get to the point where it warranted a meeting, and was it materially different from what we had heard from that the committee was okay with at that Monday meeting prior to Thanksgiving? Because obviously there were some cases that were already coming in at that point when we were talking before things started going into like the 2-a-day sort of situation. You know, there had been about 1 a day previous, just prior to that meeting. The committee had seemed to be okay with that. And at the time when we were initially reviewing that data, the 1 a day case, 1 case a day, was still continuing at that point. And it didn't seem to be that materially different from when the committee had last talked. So that was another kind of way of looking at a level of comfort and, you know, what the committee's tolerance is on that sort of data. And it seemed like there wasn't a significant difference there between what the committee had tolerated in that Monday meeting and what was on the data report at that point where we were having that discussion. That makes sense. So I think if there had been a drastic change, particularly in a data point where the committee had shown low tolerance, one of the things I had said was that the school cases seemed to be a higher priority thing to look at than the community cases, for instance. You know, that's something that we would have brought back. The community cases were already rising at the time that we met. So if we're amenable to leaving those off and either just having Brian put a blurb in his report or just have people looking at it on a ongoing basis anyway, then that's fine with me and we can leave it off. Yeah, is that good, Tina? Sorry.
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense. I mean, if we're gonna be in remote anyways, I'd rather save that extra time for other business discussion or talking about the educational piece if we're not talking about logistics of shifting. I think that's just a better use of time.
Okay. Police.
I was just going to say that Brian, I think, can just leave a short summary in his report. I think would be helpful.
Okay. All right. So I'm hearing summary, no agenda item. Is that accurate? And you guys will just reach out in between if you have concerns or issues. Okay. Was there anything else on that, Brian, that we had outstanding? I think those were the only two notes that I had. Was adding people and how we wanted to handle potentially reporting that in regular meetings.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that brings us to adjournment. So, oh, Kaylee. Yeah.
This is just jumping back to the decision to go remote. In this wave of the decision, how will that affect athletics, extracurriculars, things like that? Because I think that should probably be addressed.
So I mean, I can add I believe the way it works is if we are in remote, it requires a vote of the committee to participate in sports. So at this point in time, the winter, not the league, the winter season is scheduled to begin on December 14th. So that is on the agenda. Patrick will be at the meeting next Wednesday night, as will Tim Alberts, our athletic director, to talk about that. There was actually tonight, there was a town hall meeting that Maya was holding on basketball specifically as the one big question as an indoor winter sport with spectators. So that's still a work in progress, but obviously anything in person would be stopping as far as extracurriculars. And then there would be a decision for the committee. And I think that's something that I know it's on the agenda for next week for the business meeting, as you'll now definitively have to make a decision on that with the shift to remote.
Yeah, Kaylee's muted.
Sorry, yeah, that was all. I just wanted to double check real quick. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian, did I just hear you say that they're considering basketball with spectators?
Currently, the recommendation is yes.
Okay, I knew basketball, I didn't know spectators. Okay.
Again, not prohibited. So that would be a decision we could make locally.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay. All right, can I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Second. All right, any discussion? I need a roll call vote, please. Erin? Oh, sorry, I forgot to unmute everybody. Hang on.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Paul Goldner. I just accidentally remuted you.
Yes.
Hang on. I'm unmuting everybody. Okay, I think you're all good. Paul Goldner was yes. Maureen?
Yes.
Caitlin?
Yes.
Paulise?
Yes.
Linda?
Yes.
Paul Mayette?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
And I'm yes as well. So thank you for your time tonight. And our next business meeting is on December 9th. So I will talk to you all then, if not in between.
Everyone have a good night.
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 Night.